Hey y'all, hope you're doing good today. So I'm actually out running some errands and I have some things to do at home when I get back, and so I'm trying to get what I need to do done out and pick up a few things and get home so I can get started on some really big projects, right? And you know how I shared with you all in the last video that when I have time for a video and I sit down, it's like I feel like I don't have anything worthwhile to share, and I feel like, well, that must mean that I need to spend some more time filling my cup, spiritually, and waiting on God essentially to put a message in my mind and on my heart before I share it, right? Well, I think it's kind of funny because here I am in a hurry and all, and in my timing, trying to make things happen in my life. And I just picked up my coffee and ready to go make my stops and pick up the things that I need and go home and get started. And God says, okay, you got your coffee, now sit down and take note, because here's your message. And so here I am sharing the message for you all, because this is not my timing, but just a prompting on my heart. So take that as you will, and I hope that it means something to you and for you in a good way, right? I hope it gets the wheels turning in a good way. And I hope you're doing well. So hope you enjoy it too. Here's what came to mind, and I have to another part of this frustration, and I know it's my ego, is that when I start to get the message, it's kind of like I want to hurry the process, and you can't hurry the process, and I'm going to share with you how things are revealed to me, okay? And I wonder if you can relate to this. This is how this happens for me. So when I feel like I'm getting, some people call it a download, some people call it a revelation, just hearing from God, even though it's not literal, auditory, physical, right? At least not for me. But this is how I receive messages, right? Or insights from the ether, from the supernatural, from the heavens, from God, however you want to spin it. So sometimes I can be really focused and thinking on something that is important to me. And typically when this produces fruit, in other words, something comes out of my intense focus, it's because I have invested some, I don't want to really say emotion per se or feelings, but there's some level of energetic investment in this thought process that I have, where I'm just really intensely focused. Okay, so it's not like I'm feeling the feels or anything like that. It's just that if I'm intensely focused on something, it's like feeding attention into it at that level, because it means something to me. It almost feels like it's tapping into the spiritual realm, and it gets into stuff like what's that saying, as a man thinketh, so is he, and whatsoever things you desire, when you pray, believe that you will receive them and you shall have them. It's sort of kind of like it manifests first in your mind, right? And then a lot of people say actually it comes into reality. But for me, what happens is this process starts with them all mind, and then the revelations start to surface. And I know that for a lot of people who are not spiritual, or even maybe don't even have a belief in God, a higher power, they would just say, well, you're just utilizing your mind, the different parts of your psyche. Maybe you started this effort with your conscious awareness to really focus intensely on something important to you, and then because you were focused on it, your mind was able to pull some revelations from your subconscious into your conscious awareness, right? And that's fine. If you have that perspective, that's completely fine. But for a lot of us who have, spiritual beliefs, we believe in there being something more. It feels like a revelation in that sense, And so I just wanted to share that with you all. And then sometimes I'll have a revelation out of the blue. It's kind of like I wasn't consciously thinking about anything. It'll just happen. And I know for some people, they just receive signs in their environment, literally, and they feel like it's such a specific, out of place type thing that it just absolutely feels like it was meant for them. Maybe it was tied to a loved one who had passed away, and it was a reminder at just the perfect moment of that person because they had just started thinking of them or whatever, things like that, right? So there's all kind of different ways that we can perceive these supernatural connections, these messages that seem to come from the spiritual realm. And for me, I think, I try to backtrack when this happens, when I have a revelation. It's like I try to go backwards and say, how did I get there? What kind of thought process started this path to this revelation? Because I'm curious. And I had a lot of different thoughts earlier today as I'm, getting ready and driving and all this. And I think it was for me a mixture of recognizing that I get frustrated and sort of in a negative mindset a lot easier these days than I used to. So it sounds like that's not progress, right? But just hang with me. And because y'all know I love to really dive deep into this stuff and pick it apart and try to make sense of it. Okay, so this is what I did, and always asking questions. So in hindsight though, when I was younger and very naive, and one might say asleep, okay, unaware, I had not been given the eyes to see or the ears to hear yet because I just wasn't there. I was too caught up in the physical material, just doing what I thought I should do and leaving God out of the equation, most of the time. Not totally, but just most of the time my attention was on just the material realm, okay? And back then, the difference here, if you compare, is that I was pretty happy-go-lucky for the most part, you might say. I didn't let a lot get to me at all. But when something got to me, it was like, again, it's kind of like, if you think of it as a spectrum, most of your time, it's like I was just kind of laid back, nothing bothered me. But I would feel very, very intensely, either upset or angry or sad or whatever it is. And then on the other side, I would feel just intensely excited and or in love or happy, whatever it is, right? And I'm not talking about like in a unhealthy way where it would be something that would be akin to a mental illness, you know what I mean? Like, I think, what do they call that? Bipolar or something? Which I've never thought about why that's named what it is, but it's kind of interesting. But in other words, I'm not talking about that so much. It's just that, and I didn't notice a lot of this here in the middle, okay? So the only things I really noticed back then were things that really stood out at me. And if you think about it, and I described myself as naive, this makes sense, because when you're naive or asleep and just trusting all the time and not really having much discernment, at all, then it takes those kinds of over-exaggerated events or situations to get your attention. And because you're operating that way, then you can be taken advantage of very easily, see? Because these extreme situations can be, what's the word I want to use? Orchestrated in order to manipulate you, your trust. either way, either direction, okay? So it's all kind of coming together for me. So the way I was thinking about all this earlier, I was thinking, okay, and I'm sharing this because hopefully this is helpful to you, okay? Which is what I do here. I share my path, okay? So now I'm thinking it's kind of the opposite for me. The things on the opposite end of the spectrum, I just sort of give to God. If it's something extreme, it's just I am more focused now on the spiritual than I am the physical. That's the difference in me. And how this manifests in my life is that those extreme things are not, I don't pay as much attention to them anymore. They don't affect me as much. And a lot of times this is described as just getting more mellow as you age. And it's funny because if you think about people who are in the latter years of their life, they're typically described as either they've just really mellowed out, as compared to when they were younger, or they've either gotten worse, and they're just more intense and opinionated and offensive to people or whatever, and so it's kind of interesting. But for me, I have been more of one so far to mellow out, and it's sort of like it feels to me like a paradox, and here's why. On one hand, I feel like I have better discernment now. I have the eyes to see. Things are clearer to me now, okay? And this makes sense because if you're thinking about a spectrum, and before you were unaware, so you didn't catch a lot of things unless they were extreme. Well, now if you have the eyes to see, then you see all this in the middle that in the past you overlooked because you couldn't see it. And what this equates to is nuance in situations, in environments, in situations, in people, in all your experiences and everything. You just are awake now. You are aware. You have the eyes to see. Things are clear to you, however you want to position this, right? Spin it. But you catch it now. I don't think any of us are totally infallible and, can say we catch everything, but we catch a lot more. And so the irony is, I was looking at the etymology of the word nuance, and this is sort of like getting into the paradox part of it. And I didn't write this down because I don't know where my journals are. I think they're at home. But again, this was impromptu because it was placed on my heart, and it was like, now's the time for the message. And I'm like, I don't have a notebook, so I'm trying to recall this from memory, okay? And but I was reading earlier about the etymology of the word nuance, and it's related to, and I'll drop it in the description for you all. It has old Latin roots that are related actually to clouds or cloudiness or a veil. And I was thinking, okay, this feels like the opposite of clarity, to be veiled, to be cloudy. I'm thinking about all those old archetypal, all the old fairy tales and legends that are full of archetypal symbolism is what I'm thinking of. And, the main character typically finds himself in the woods or just a confusing place, a fog, things like that, right? And yet, if you think about that, even though it feels confusing to them, at the same time, this is the magical paradox, right? Which is what I feel like truth, if you want to talk about what's really true, what truth really is to me, is a paradox. And that's just getting really deep. And so we'll just leave that there. But when they go into the woods and they're on this quest, a lot of times they've been thrust into the woods, the fog, whatever, to work things out. Again, it's confusing, but simultaneously they're learning, and as they're learning through the process, things are getting clearer. And think about, the canopy that envelops, a place like, being in the forest. It's shaded, it's in comparison to, imagine yourself walking in that scenario. Say it's a super bright, sunny day, and which down here in the south it's actually pretty warm today. And I'm thinking, I wonder how hot summer's going to be. I've got my air going. Hope you can hear me okay. But imagine walking through the canopy of a forest on a really bright, sunny day. Things are going to be a lot sharper there for you, okay? Versus walking out just in the open with the bright sun. It's like, it's so blinding that you can't distinguish nuance in that bright light. Everything is illuminated to such a degree that it's sort of a wash. It's washed out. So this gets into sort of my roots in art and all my studies throughout the years, right? And I've shared with you all, as an artist, if you want to learn how to have the eyes to see as an artist, to see the nuance, to train yourself, as opposed to just say you're going to paint grass. A child is just going to grab green and it's all going to be green, right? But a trained or a practiced artist is going to understand that there's multiple colors within that green grass. And as you are learning and training your eyes to see those different colors so you know how and where to place them, a trick you can do is to squint your eyes. So you're cutting out a lot. You're creating a veil. You're creating a filter, a screen, cloudiness. You're bringing it down a little bit, and you're able to see clearer that way. And I'm sure there's a billion other examples you can think of, but typically we think of, spiritually speaking, when the veil is torn spiritually, then it means that we can see clearly, right? But yet, ironically, at that same time, when you are reborn in that way, you are no longer in and of the world. At that point, you are still in the world, but you are no longer of the world, right? And so at that point, the things in this material realm don't vibe with you the same anymore. They just don't resonate with you anymore. And a lot of times that's when, decades long friendships and relationships, even with family members and things like that, fall away. And to me, I've shared this before, this is the spiritual experience, but yet literal, of the division that happens naturally between the wheat and the tares when one is reborn and becomes no longer of this world. Now, it's sort of like you're dying to the world, but yet you're reborn in the spiritual realm. And so the way this is actually experienced, just to come back down to reality and get grounded again, and make some sense here. The way this is experienced, at least for me, and this kind of just brought me a little bit of just validation as I thought through this, and that brings me comfort and confidence in my walk, is that and again, these metaphors are just great, aren't they? Visualizations, whatever tactics we need, the stories, the personifications of all the symbolism, even if it's the characters themselves, how they can represent so much, and how we can just learn from these stories. It's kind of like the same story is the way I start to see all of it. It's kind of like the same hero's journey, sort of, but yet I really don't think everyone goes on it. Maybe they do. Maybe it's just same but yet very, very different for each of us. I don't know. But realistically, remember, in these stories, you're thrust into the woods, into the fog, into the canopy of the woods. It feels dangerous, but yet you're protected. See? And again, you can rope Christianity into this. We are now hidden with Christ. Okay? So there's just layers and layers of this, just fragments of this truth through different lenses and perspectives in all different religions and philosophies and stories. I just encourage you, if you have interest, to journal on it. And you can even make like a little map, with a concept in the middle with a circle, and then just draw your little branches out and illustrate for yourself, make a visual of how this concept is supported or communicated as a big part of this religion and this religion and this belief and this story and this fairy tale. You know what I mean? It's kind of cool. And when you see it that way, then suddenly you realize that it truly feels, at least, or seems like all the same story. But in reality, when you're going through the woods or whatnot, it's kind of like you're already a new person at that point, but you're like a baby. And so it feels and seems to you like it's very confusing and it's scary, because it's unfamiliar to you naturally. But as your eyes adjust, think about a newborn baby. They can't see very well immediately. From what I recall, at least, it takes a little while for their eyes to be able to really see the details, of their parents' faces and things like that. But you're developing those eyes, okay, in this new environment, which is your life now. And as you do, you start to notice the nuances, which is essentially slight differences. And I'm going to give you another example even. I did photography for a short time. I really, really enjoyed it. I did it for fun mostly, but I did do a couple of weddings as well. But, a lot of photographers will tell you that, I'm thinking I'm having a flood of memories of different points, but let me stay focused here. Pay attention to what I'm trying to share specifically. A lot of photographers will tell you that one of the best times of day to take portrait photography of like a family or whatever outside is at dusk, when the sun is about to go down but hasn't gone down. It's like a dulling, a veil, a cloudiness, this layering, but yet in this magical moment, everything becomes crystal clear and sharp in the imagery, and it's beautiful. And I've, explicitly done this and looked at this myself, through the lens of my camera. It's really cool. So there's a tip too for you. But I'm thinking about white balancing too, for when your pictures have too much yellow in them and all that. Maybe I'll do a video on that, because there's a lot of symbolism we can pull from that hobby, photography. But yes, so this is your new life now, and the way it can be experienced in the nuance. You may indeed find yourself frustrated or displeased with things more often, but it doesn't mean that you're not on the right path or you're not being successful in your walk. It's just that you're noticing more now. But notice also that even though if you're displeased or you notice things that come across as negative to you, it's not intense like the opposite ends of the spectrum, okay? Like when the sun is really, really bright. It's not intense like that. It's just, you can handle it more. You know what I mean? Which goes right along with a lot of teachings as well as you mature, in your walk too, that you're able to handle more, okay? But I just want to point that out. Think about, maybe journal if you have interest about nuance in your life, the things that you notice, how this affects you. Maybe you're, for me, I'll just flat out tell you, the area that I live in has been one of the nation's top areas for growth with population for many years, and it didn't really affect me much until recently. And the counties, the local governments are trying to catch up, with the highways, what do they call that? infrastructure to accommodate all of this population boom and everything. But those of us who have been here a very long time, it's kind of hard to experience, you know, how it used to not be an issue just to hop in your car and go somewhere and come right back, and it was a 10-minute trip, and now it's a 30-minute trip kind of thing. So that's frustrating for me, you know what I mean? But there's just all different, you know, specifics to this experience that I'm noticing constantly. And I can remember times in the past that these specific things I didn't notice, again, because I was just sort of asleep, you know. But the cool thing is, I also notice the little things in a positive way too, that in the past you might say I took for granted. I didn't realize I was taking anything for granted, but now I can look back, and I don't really like to say that, because that's sort of like being judgmental against yourself and blaming yourself. It's kind of like we only can do the best that we can do with what we have, with our awareness at any given time, right? But yes, the little things are more important to me now. I notice them all, and because of that, it's a blessing. I get to treasure them, because I do in fact notice them, because I am at a place finally where I can pay attention at that level, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So I hope that this has been enlightening for you. I hope it got the wheels turning in a good way. I hope it gave you something good to think about. I hope that it maybe resonated for you and gave you some validation on your walk. Thank you so much for coming along to hear the message. I hope that you have a beautiful day, and I will see you again very soon. And I am doing a lot of gardening, and I can't wait to share some pictures with you all of all my flowers. So thanks so much again. Have a beautiful day. I'll see you soon.